Build creative confidence. Beat the inspiration addiction. Join the Writer's Gym. J.D. Barker is a New York Times and international best-selling American author whose work has been broadly described as suspense thrillers, often incorporating elements of horror, crime, mystery, and the supernatural. He is a frequent collaborator with James Patterson and has written numerous best-selling titles which have appeared on the bestseller lists around the world. So, really nice to see you, JD. I invented the Writer's Gym because one of the things that I felt wasn't as joined up as it could be was people get feedback on their writing and don't always get feedback on the writer or find the healthy ways to be that writer. So one of the things I'd love to talk to you about today, and I know that one of the books that you're coming on to soon is to do with that side of things, of creativity, of healthy habits and things like that. What has that side of things been like for you?
Well, I've done the full gambit of it. So I was writing pretty much my entire life, but it's one of those things I was told that you can't make a living as a writer, so you have to get a real job. So I went to college, I got a couple of degrees, I ended up working in finance, and I would come home and write at night. Writing for me is like an itch that I have to scratch. So like, it's not a choice. Like I have to do it every day or I get very, very twitchy. I get very irritable, and it's something I have to do, which is something I tell people straight off the bat, because I personally feel that if you don't feel that way, I don't know that you can make it as a writer. You know, like you have to really want this, because I've met so many people that are, that I want to write a book, and but they hate the actual process. They hate getting in the chair. They hate sitting in front of their computer and putting words on paper. And like, if you don't love it, like this is such a difficult job to begin with. If you're not completely into it, it's near impossible. But when I was in the corporate world, I squeezed out about 200 to 300 words a day. And I would write anywhere I could. I was working 60, 80 hours a week. But I would write in line at the grocery store. I would write, during my lunch break. I always found a way to get it done. And I think you kind of have to. In today's world now, I'm a full-time author. I just celebrated my 10th year about 2 months ago, back in November. I've got a pretty regimented schedule at this point. So it's the complete opposite what I was doing before. But I still have to tell myself this is a full-time job. You kind of have to treat it that way. So my butt's in my chair every work day. I'm there for the entire business day. My version of a business day, it ends a little earlier than it probably did in the corporate world. But I treat it as a job, and I think that's important too.
What is your business day like? Do you do the 9 to 5, or are you an early start, early finish?
I've got I live down the street from Dan Brown, who wrote the Da Vinci Code. And he's writing by like 5 o'clock in the morning. And like, I cannot do that. Like I swore when I left the corporate world, I was going to never set an alarm before 7 a.m. again. So I get up promptly at 7 o'clock in the morning. I make a pit stop in the kitchen to say good morning to my wife and my daughter, grab a cup of coffee, and then I head into my office. I turn off the internet when I first start, and I don't turn it on until I get my daily word count done. Because it's just too distracting for me. And, the second stuff starts coming in, I get lost and get sidetracked. And so the internet's completely off. I hammer out about 2,000 to 3,000 words, which I'm usually done with by about 10:30 or so. Then I flip that switch on the internet. All the emails start coming in. So basically the business side of this that I have to deal with. And then I work on that in a combination of interviews like this one. I do that until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That's when my quitting bell rings. And I live on a little island off the coast of Portsmouth in New Hampshire or New England. I go for a lap around the island. It's about 4.25 miles, just to get some exercise, to kind of clear my head. And I think about what I'm going to write the next day. Then I come home and I spend the rest of the night with my wife and daughter and just have family time. And I that's kind of evolved over time. When I first started selling a lot of books, particularly when I got published in different countries, I found myself doing interviews at ridiculous times at night. Like if your book is coming out in Istanbul, I would be up at 4 o'clock in the morning doing an interview, or 2 o'clock in the morning, 11 o'clock at night. And I didn't turn down anything. But I quickly realized that it wasn't sustainable. I was going to burn out if I kept doing that. So now I have that firm cutoff. Everything's got to be scheduled before 3 p.m. my time. If it can't be done before then, I just don't do it.
Are you a leaving yourself notes person? Because something that struck me when you were talking about before you were writing full time, finding the moments to get those X hundred or however many it was words a day, Because for me, it was the phone notebook. It was when you lock that bathroom door, no one's asking you where you are or what you should be doing. Nobody knows. It was those secret moments of extra writing that really did it for me. Was it at all similar for you, or the leaving notes to yourself to come back the next time? What's that been like?
There's two little tricks that I learned very early on that I still do today. So whenever I write, I listen to a thunderstorm soundtrack on noise canceling headphones. And it, not only does it drown out everything going on around me, but it's a Pavlov's dog kind of thing. As soon as I hear that noise, my mind immediately snaps into writer mode. So there's no, wake up time. I'm not starting at a blank screen. The other thing I've done pretty much from the get-go is I always quit writing in the middle of a sentence. I always know what's coming next. And by doing that, I don't worry about it. I spend the rest of my day thinking about what comes next. My brain continues to work the story, but I never have, downtime. When I first started doing this, I would write until the well went dry. I'd have like a huge day, 6,000, 7,000 words. By the end of it, I'm exhausted. It was like squeezing water out of a rock. And I have no ideas left. There's literally no thoughts on this particular book in my head anymore. I got them all down on paper. Then the next day I would sit down and try to continue, and I would stare at that blank screen for, sometimes hours at a time trying to get back into it. But by quitting in the middle of a sentence, in the middle of a paragraph, I already, I know what's coming next. It makes it so easy. I sit down and just hit the ground running. So like those two things got me through it back when I was doing a couple hundred words. And I still do them today when I do a few thousand words.
One of my favorite David Lynch quotes that you've just made me think of is, I have forgotten maybe 5 ideas ever, or 5 good ideas ever, because his thing is go where the fish are. Bring your fishing rod to the things that make you feel in the zone. Be by the river. Don't put yourself in the middle of a desert going, what's wrong with me? Why am I catching no fish? And for him, it's about don't give them a chance to swim away, as in don't not write the idea when it comes down. But it sounds like you're in a different compartment to that. Is it different for you? Because for me, I will want to give myself a keyword if there is an idea. If I'm not in the writing mode, but something has swum past, I need to catch it. I need to know it's still going to be there. I'm just wondering how that relates to sort of leaving off in the middle of a sentence, or if you're somewhere else, an idea. How
I think we all kind of do that. I mean, years back it was paper notes. I would scribble it down and put it down somewhere. I learned very early on, like when you wake up at 3:00 in the morning and you get an idea for your book, you'll tell yourself you're going to remember it in the morning, and you never remember it in the morning. So I've always written it down. And in today's world, I use a program called Simple Note. And what I like about it, it's on my phone, it's on my Mac, it's even on my watch, and everything is synced. So if I get an idea, even while I'm out on a run, I can literally just say it into my watch and it'll transfer it into text and drop it into these other things. So it's just always there. It's always backed up. So that's what I do today. But yeah, I feel you need to write all those down. And that's depending on who you ask, you'll get very different answers on that. Stephen King has famously said many times that he doesn't write any of his ideas down. If he feels they're strong enough to be worthwhile, he's going to remember them. But I feel like I'm juggling too many books. I'm writing 8 different ones right now all at the same time. So to not write stuff down, I think I would go insane.
I second the going insane if the ideas do not land somewhere safely, that you want to know they're okay.
That's the other. Yeah. I mean, I think that there's part of that too. Like if you have an idea and it's like, it's in your head, for me, I got to get it out of my head, or I'm constantly thinking about it. And if I put it down on paper, I write it down in Simple Note. Now I know it's someplace safe. I can move that brain power onto something else.
Something that is a big reality for a lot of us is that there are the multiple projects, there are the multiple brain tabs open. And I know you write, you have a column for Rolling Stone as well, don't you, as well as the books?
Yeah, because I have trouble saying no. It's like when Rolling Stone calls and asks if you'd like to write a column for them, it's hard to say no to that. So I do it. I'm currently writing a bunch of books with co-authors. I write with James Patterson quite a bit. I've got solo titles coming out. So I'm juggling a lot of different balls.
When you were a little way back career-wise, maybe pre-Rolling Stone, maybe pre a few books, what worked for you in terms of chasing or choosing or pitching to things like that? Was that something you went through, made selections like that as a freelancer?
I sort of came out of that world. So if we go way back in time, when I was in college, I was in school for business and for finance, but I was working for RCA Records. And I was essentially a glorified babysitter. I was in South Florida, and whenever they had a recording artist come to town, I'd have to pick them up at the airport, get them to their concert, get them to their radio station, get them to their hotel, and get them back on their airplane. And, sometimes I had some very famous people with me for 3 or 4 days at a time. So about a month or two into it, I realized I could interview these people. So I started doing that while I had them captive in the car, and then I would sell those interviews to magazines like 17 and Teen Beat, Tiger Beat, all these magazines that my sister loved when she was growing up. So that's how I broke into that world. And so it's funny because a lot of the people that I worked with way back then have moved on to some of these other positions. They're now working in Hollywood. They're working, at some of the big publishers. They're working for Rolling Stone. So I haven't really had to go out and pitch, these types of ideas. A lot of times it's a friend of mine picking up the phone saying, "Hey, we'd love for you to do this." But one of the biggest things in this business or in any business, I think really is contacts. You never know who, when you meet somebody, you never know how you might be able to help each other later on. So I'm very good at, making those introductions. I rarely, shy away from somebody. I will always say hi to them, and I make a mental note of who they are and where they are and try to stay in touch with them over time. And you never know when those kind of things will pay off.
That connection, really, it's why we're writing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you another example. There's an old movie from the 90s called Flatliners, which I absolutely love. It's got Julia Roberts in it, Kevin Bacon, Kiefer Sutherland, Billy Baldwin, all these people at the start of their career before anybody knew who they were. And I've that's been one of my favorite movies my entire life. I've got a project in the works with Paramount called Dracul. It's a prequel that I wrote with Bram Stoker's family, a prequel to Dracula. And one of the guys who worked on that project was named Peter Filardi. And once I got to know him, I realized he's the guy who wrote the original screenplay for Flatliners. So I told him at the time, I've got an idea to reboot the franchise if you're ever interested in doing that. And this was a couple of years ago. And he said, well, the studio still owns those rights. I don't think I'll ever get them back. But I put that seed in his head. And then this past January, about a year ago now, he called me up and said, "Hey, JD, I just got the rights back. Do you still want to do something?" So, I'm currently writing a book to reboot the Flatliners franchise, which is just one of those things, you plant those seeds and you never know what's going to come back.
And it's very much about sticking to what do I want to see in the world, isn't it? Because what you're describing there, they're based on very genuine ideas, patterns.
Well, that's the cool thing about being a writer. I love that movie. I love the storyline and the premise behind it, but I had other places where I felt it could go. Instead of me sitting back waiting for that movie to happen, I'm just creating the book and I'm making it happen myself because I selfishly want to see that on the screen.
And for me, that's probably the happiest advice to hear from anyone in this profession, that it is about noticing what you love, what makes you curious. I feel a lot of confidence, if not all confidence, it comes from curiosity. That if you're focused on...
I think it has to. And if you're not that passionate about it, if you don't love it, the readers will pick up on it. It has to be something that you're really into. So, even if I'm writing a book, if I get halfway through it and I'm not feeling that particular vibe, I'll put it aside, indefinitely if that's what it means. But I have to be into that project from start to finish if I'm going to do it.
One of my, is it inspirations? Is it whatever it is? One of my favorite things to do as a writer is what my cat used to do. God bless him. Teddy would be on one sofa one week, and that would be the only sofa in the world. And then another week it would be this sofa, and that would be the only sofa in the world. I find that I migrate, both with my projects and with where I write in the room. There will be a certain place that is right for one project, and one might be the desk and it might be the computer, and another might be a notebook and something else. Are you a one process person, or does different moods bring you to different areas of work?
No, it's funny that you bring that up. I mean, so I've got a really nice office. I've got a desk over here that I work at pretty much every day. But I'm writing in different formats. You can kind of see it in the bottom behind me here on that shelf. There's a typewriter. So every day when I walk by that typewriter in the morning, I write a sentence or two on a book that I'm working on just specifically on that typewriter. I've got a stack of notepads over on the side of my desk, and I'm writing another story in longhand. I primarily write my main project in a program called Scrivener, but I find that using all these different methods, my voice is different and the storytelling process is different, which helps keep it fun, helps keep it entertaining. There's something very cool about writing a book on a typewriter or even longhand. You can't go back and make changes quite as easily as you can when you're writing it on a computer. So I think that's part of it. It takes me, I type 120 words a minute. I write much, much slower than that. So I think that's part of the reason why my voice is different. But I like changing it up like that, just because it helps create unique stories. I used to bounce around all the time, when I was still working the day job, and I would write in different places constantly. And sometimes it would be the library. Sometimes it was an office, like an undeveloped office space inside of my building that, I just could sneak away to. I like the ambiance of that. And I would change it up, based on what I was working on, whether it was a particular scene or following a certain character. Some characters got written at the library, other ones got written here. Anything like that can keep it interesting and get you to that last page is worthwhile.
It's funny to hear myself saying this, but when you talked about the typewriter, my instinct was to say, doesn't it drive you mad not being able to go back, delete, move things around? But the piece of advice I give myself that I share with other people quite a bit is not being able to delete is the best thing in the world. You can follow your thought process. You can do longhand things that you might miss on the computer. Is that what's going on with the typewriter?
That's a big part of it. I'm a huge fan of deleted scenes. So like the prequel that I wrote to Dracula, let me back up a little bit. So Dracula, the book, as we know it starts with Jonathan Harker on the train. What I learned when I was working on that project, that's actually page 120 of the original manuscript. Bram originally wrote an entire section that was very autobiographical, basically explaining why he felt vampires were real. And when he turned that manuscript in, his publisher said, we can't put this out. It's going to scare the crap out of people. And they made him cut all these pages out. So when we wrote this prequel, the prequel is essentially a retelling of those 120 pages. But we wanted to verify the story once we got it down on paper and make sure we were accurate. And we tried to figure out a way to do that. And I learned that the only original copy of the Dracula manuscript in existence was bought by Paul Allen, who co-founded Microsoft. And he had it out in Seattle. So I reached out to Paul Allen's people, and they let Dacre Stoker, who's Bram's great-grandnephew, and we flew out there and we got to see the original Dracula manuscript. And first thing we did is we opened a page, the first page, hoping to find those missing 120 pages. They weren't there either. Page number up at the top was crossed out and the number 1 was written next to it. So we thought that we weren't going to be able to do anything. But then we started flipping through the manuscript and realized that the deleted scenes basically referred back to those first 120 pages. Because Bram didn't have a computer. He couldn't delete. So when he wiped out a sentence or a paragraph, he just X'd it out. So they were still there. So those deleted scenes allowed us to put that manuscript back together. And sometimes it's, deleted scenes can be fun. Like sitting next to my fireplace, there's a stack of pages. That's the original typewritten manuscript for Needful Things from Stephen King, which he wrote on a typewriter. So sometimes I'll flip through it, and to me, it's very inspirational to see his handwritten notes to figure out what Stephen King felt needed to come out of that book. So I'm a huge fan of deleted scenes.
Circling back to something you said earlier about needing to want to write or needing to write, wanting to write. And if you don't want to write, maybe it's worth wondering if you want to be a writer. While I agree with that, I also know the power of fear to disguise itself as, nah, don't want to, or nah, I'll do it another day. And while when we're doing it professionally, we find our workarounds for that. When it's newer, or when it's still a dream rather than a goal, when people haven't put their plans in place yet, that can be a whole other thing. What would you say to people who pretty much do want to write? I mean, anyone who's turning up to the Writers' Gym at the podcast or a member of it, they know they want to. We all know we want to. But fear, procrastination, perfectionism, all of those things can be pretty efficient barriers between what we want and what we fear. What would you say to those people who are still in there?
I mean, the barriers, I think, is a great word, but at the same time, we manufacture those ourselves, right? So to me, writing is very much like going to the gym. If you go to the gym every single day and you lift a certain amount of weight, it gets easier. You can lift more. You can do more. Writing is the same thing. So as daunting as it may be, if you write every single day, if you set a goal of 200 words a day and you do 200 words a day, you're going to find that it's very easy to push on to 300, 400, 500, 1,000, 2,000. The more often you do it, the easier it gets. I used to try to write kind of in the method that you said, because I was working so many hours. I was thinking, well, I can only work on Saturdays. I can try and squeeze this in on holidays. To me, it wasn't effective because so much time went by between those writing sessions. My voice was actually different. My writer voice was different. I would have to go back and read what I had written previously just to refresh myself on the storyline and remember where I was. Like all these things kind of add to those barriers, but we're manufacturing that. So just sitting down every day, it gets easier and easier to do. And even if I get stuck on something, and I feel like I don't know where the story is going, if I sit down at my computer, usually it comes to me almost right away. But if I don't do that, I could go hours, I could go days, thinking that I'm stuck. But then literally, as soon as I sit down to start working on it, the words are there. So it's easier to actually do the writing to me than it is to not do the writing.
Easier to do the writing than to not do the writing. I so agree with that. Another thing we talk about at the Writers' Gym is the emotional weightlifting. That the reason I think for that is that your body, your brain, it becomes more familiar, doesn't it? The writing becomes more part of what we do. Whereas if the procrastination becomes familiar, the procrastination becomes reassuring, but the writing can be reassuring.
Yeah. The procrastination can dominate that entire process and keep you from doing it if you let it. Again, I think it's easier to do it.
Do you have a favorite book, either that you're working on or that you have done in the past? And how much of that is, if you do have any favorites, do they tend to be for the experience of writing it or what's enjoyable to read now? Or is that like asking if you have a favorite kid?
I was just going to say that is very much like asking if you have a favorite kid. To me, my favorite book tends to be whatever book I'm working on now, because I get excited about that current project. But it's funny because I'm 12 books in, I think, at this point, and I've been all over the world, meeting with fans, and a lot of times for the first time. Like I was just in Budapest, never been there before. I think I've got 5 or 6 titles that have come out there already. And I had like 1,000 people that showed up for the talk and signing that I did, and they all had like stacks of my books. And the one book that I saw over and over again is this title called "She Had a Broken Thing Where Her Heart Should Be," which was a book that like my agent didn't want. It was because it's super long. It was 210,000 words, I think. It's almost 1,000 pages printed. My agent's like, there's no way we could sell this. It was different from what I was previously writing because prior to that, I had a serial killer series called The Fourth Monkey, which had really taken off. I mean, it's still selling well today. And the problem is when you write something that hits really big, everybody wants, from the industry side, they want that same book again, but different. And I didn't want to get caught in that pigeonhole. So I kind of wrote this other book, which was very different. It's basically my retelling of Great Expectations, which is probably my all-time favorite book. But the funny thing is, like I go to places like Istanbul, I go to places like Budapest or Spain or, wherever. Like that's the one book that people put in front of me consistently and say, this is my favorite. This is my favorite. All around the world. It's my wife's favorite, which probably says something. Like maybe I should have listened to her from the get-go. So I think from a fan standpoint, that's probably the favorite book out there. For me personally, it was probably my funnest one to write. But the book I'm working on now for Flatliners is a lot of fun too. So I know the next one's going to be a good time. That's part of the enjoyment of this is just knowing like I know what my next book is going to be. And like it's dangling in front of me like a carrot. Like I want to get out there and just get working on it.
One of the deep worries I see with a lot of clients is when we get through all the nonsense your brain says about what if it's not interesting, what if it's too weird, what if it's not original enough, what if it's too original, all the ways that your brain can get in your way when it's early on. One of the sort of next layers that I love talking to published authors about is there can be a worry I'm telling the same story. And what I tend to say about that is we've all got a story somewhere deep that we are revisiting and we are retelling. Is that something you think about, a sort of what is the heart of my stories, or what is the thing that I come back to? Because there's certain things that I see myself doing, like with Twisted Branches, with my last short story collection, the idea of 5 generations in one family house and how they knowingly and unknowingly mess up and light up each other's lives. That for me felt exciting because it was what I suppose I'm asking about people, about the influences that we don't know we have over each other. I think that's something I keep going back to. Do you feel like you have something you keep going back to, or is there something maybe in Great Expectations that you mentioned that was maybe a sort of light that started it?
I am very careful to not be repetitive, but it does happen. I think that's more of a subconscious thing. I think our brain wants to go back to a lot of these places and these scenarios. So we have to learn to spot them and weed them out. I've been very careful just to make sure that I don't tell the same story over and over again. I write horror novels, I write thrillers, I purposely bounce back and forth. All these things completely aggravate the people on the business side of this. Like my agent hates it because she would love nothing more than to be able to say this guy is a thriller author, and allow publishers to sell me as a thriller author. But I like to bounce around in the different genres. I don't want to tell that same story over and over again. Lee Child is a really nice guy, fantastic storyteller, but he's not really Lee Child. If you go to his Wikipedia page, it actually gives you his real name. Before the Reacher books took off, he had written a number of different books under different names, and the Lee Child pseudonym, those Reacher books were the ones that actually hit really big. So before he knew it, he was stuck writing a Jack Reacher novel every single year, over and over. And while that was entertaining, to us as readers, as an author, he got bored with it. He's retired now, probably because he didn't want to write another Reacher book. And like the idea of that happening to me just scares the bejesus out of me. So I purposely change it up. My stories are extremely different. I like to think that my common thread in all of them is suspense. But some may have horror, some may have romance, some may have sci-fi. I'm going to branch off in a lot of different directions. My author voice is always going to be the same, and I think that's what the readers come for. But the story is going to be different. And I think readers enjoy that too. They don't want to read the same thing from the same author over and over again.
One of the best things for me was discovering that horror was the literature of fear, that whatever it is we're scared of, that's the place to find it. And I personally found that a useful exercise, that it was just by knowing I was in that genre, it reminded me that you take that torch into any corner, you see what you can find. Was there any sort of thing you said to yourself, or any maybe writing exercise, like we were talking about the emotional weightlifting at the gym? Is there anything in particular that's helped you that you might share with other writers?
It's funny that horror jumps out, just because like I was reading at a very early age. I had read all the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew mysteries by the time I got into kindergarten. That I had moved on to Charles Dickens' Great Expectations, again, my favorite book. The first adult book I ever picked up, though, was Dracula. My mom owned an antique store, and we used to go to a lot of yard sales and garage sales. And I remember seeing a copy of Dracula. It was for 25 cents. It was sitting in a box of books. And I picked it up, and I knew it wasn't something I was supposed to have at 8 years old. It just didn't feel right. But my mom let me buy it. She let me read it. And it's the first book that ever scared me, like to the point where like I had to leave my lights on at night. And that the fact that it could bring out that emotion in me, I think that's why I gravitated towards horror. That was the first genre that was able to actually create something like that within me. As a writer, like I purposely try to do that. I tried to create those emotional moments for readers. I've got a book coming out in May called Something I Keep Upstairs, which is by far the scariest book I've ever written. It's about a haunted house. It took me 4 years to write. There were some scenes in there that just freaked me out to the point where I had to put that book aside, for a little while, work on something else and come back to it. But I think that's where the real gold is. I think, if we fall into a comfort zone, even as a writer, the readers pick up on that. You need to be uncomfortable on paper, especially when you're writing horror, if you want your readers to feel the same thing.
Well, we'll definitely go there to be scared, and I'm looking forward to that. Who else scares you? Who do you read that scares you?
Emails from my agent.
Just Dracula.
I've kind of fallen into the same groups I think as a lot of other people. Stephen King is a go-to. I'm a big Dean Koontz fan. James Patterson has been a huge influence on me, not even before I started working with the guy, just his writing style. King in particular, though, like I get every one of his books, and like I'll read through it first as a fan, and then I go back through with the highlighter and try to pick apart what he's actually done as a writer. Because he's one of these guys where he can create like a full character in 2 or 3 sentences. Which is an amazing skill to have as an author. So, I've got collections of his short stories where I've highlighted every time he introduces a new character just to try to figure out how he does that sort of thing. I think in this world, it's a constant learning experience. You're always, picking, little tidbits here and there from the people that inspire you, and trying to figure out how to work those into your own writing.
Oh, such a good exercise. JD, my favourite of all possible questions. What haven't I asked you that you wish I had? What haven't we covered that you would like to cover?
I think we've talked about a lot of stuff. I've got a bunch of books coming out. I'd love for your viewers to pick up a couple of them. I've got We Don't Talk About Emma coming out in February. I've got another one called The Writer coming out with James Patterson in March, and then Something I Keep Upstairs comes out in May. The Writer in particular, that was probably I've written 5 books now with Patterson. This was by far the funnest one. And it's got an ending that, like, I surprised him with this ending. So it takes a lot to surprise James Patterson, and I can proudly say that I did it.
Now there is the line for the rest of May I surprised James Patterson. I'm guessing sort of starting out young you would be quite a fun thing to know, wouldn't it? When it's writers that influenced you.
He's been a huge influence on me. He originally, we sent him a copy of The Fourth Monkey, which was my serial killer thriller, just hoping to get a blurb for the back cover. Your publishers will do that. They'll mail out a couple hundred copies to all these big name authors, just hoping somebody will give you that sentence you can put on the jacket. And he actually called me to give me his review of the book. And, he was not only spot on in that, but then we just got to talking and ultimately decided to write together. And working with him, it's very much like taking his master class. He's got a master class you can take online. The difference is when you actually write with them, he calls you directly to tell you what you're doing wrong. But it's really been, it's gotten to the point where, like, I work on books on my own that have nothing to do with him, and I can hear his voice behind me, like that sentence doesn't need to be there. Cut that paragraph. It's too long. This is going on. Too wordy. So it's been fun.
Beautiful. Well, JD, thank you so much for coming to talk to the Writers' Gym.
All right, take care. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Good to see you. You've visited the Writers' Gym with author and coach Dr. Rachel Knightley. Production and sound design are by Ashley Lexine, and theme music is by Chris Gregory. To join a Writers' Gym workout online or in London as a guest or as a member, visit writersgym.com or email thewritersgym@rachelknightley.com.